Good, go ahead.
All right. I'm going ahead. Okay, so what do I want to talk about this afternoon? Well, first of all, an introduction for people who don't know a great deal about this, if there are any. Second, to talk about progress on our existing application. This is an application where you apply, not an application in the technical sense. Then the timetable, the usage survey, and I want to finish up by talking about currency conversion, a subject close to all our hearts. Right, let me start then with the introduction. So the history of the engagement. We started off looking at the existing ISO20022 message set and thinking about its suitability for use in IIPSs, for which at the moment read modular. Our conclusion at that time was that it wasn't suitable for us. It didn't offer any way for agreeing terms. There was no deterministic outcome of transfers. Transfers could hang about for ages. There was no support for PISP registration, which we needed. There was no support for transfer level foreign exchange. And there was no support for identifiers, which we wanted to use. So our conclusion at that time was that ISO20022 messages were not suitable for implementing an IIPS system. Indeed, that they were basically designed for large banks in large economies, and sometimes for large credit card companies in large economies as well. It's important to emphasize. So, those of you who are old enough to remember Harold Macmillan, the Prime Minister of the... Oh, sorry, James, you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, Michael, would you mind just saying again, if you have already said and I missed, when was that initial assessment performed? How long ago?
Oh, must be about 3 years ago now, I think. Possibly longer than that.
Thank you.
We did an initial assessment actually when we began the project 6 years ago.
Oh, okay. So 6 years ago.
The 3 year ago assessment had not changed a whit.
Yes. And we're starting to understand why.
And we have a bundle of wits now that we did not have at the beginning.
Indeed.
Applied to the problem.
Yes. Right. So those of you, I was about to say, who remember Harold Macmillan, the Prime Minister of the UK during the 50s and 60s, early 60s, who was once asked why he had not implemented all the things he had promised in his election manifesto. And his answer was, events, dear boy, events. So things happen. And it gradually became clear that ISO 20022 was becoming the global standard for payments messaging, and that therefore we would need to respond to this in some way. We thought that our choices were either to propose a way of using the existing ISO 20022 messages to support systems of our kind, or alternatively to propose changes to the standard to support the use of the standard in our sorts of systems. And if the latter, we thought changes could be of two kinds. First of all, we could add supplementary data to existing messages. Now, supplementary data is rather like the additional fields that we allow to be stuck on the bottom of a number of our FSP-IOP messages. It's a way of basically saying, I'm going to stick some extra stuff in this message, but it's not really going to be part of the message. It's going to be in the supplementary data area. Now, it's much easier to get approval for this from the ISO standards organization, because essentially what you're saying is, I'm an odd person and I want to do things in an odd way, so why don't you let me? The second of these, then, is we could make the standard itself responsive to the needs of MD users of payment systems. In both cases, we opted for the latter, that is, proposing changes to the ISO 20022 standard rather than trying to use the existing messages, and making the standard itself responsive to the use to the needs of MD users rather than using supplementary data. So, we joined the ISO 20022 standards organization. We sit on the following committees: the Resource Management Group, which has overall management of the standard and is responsible for the approval of new messages; the Payments Standards Evaluation Group, which is responsible for the management and approval of changes to existing messages in the payment space, and a technical support group, and the API support group. So we are, we're card-carrying members of the ISO 20022 standards organization. So now, let me talk a little bit about how changes get made to ISO 20022 messages. So first of all, a member submits a business justification for a change that basically says why this thing is necessary and why the existing system doesn't support it. The business justification is evaluated by the relevant standards evaluation group, in our case, the payments SEG. And if approved, they form an evaluation team to assess the requirements and recommend changes to the actual messages to meet those requirements. Those recommendations are approved by the SEG, and where necessary, that is where there are new messages involved, by the resource management group, registration management group, sorry. And the changes are then made and published as part of the standard. And now Sam Cooke fans will recognize this. Any Sam Cooke fans in the audience? No, I thought not. You're all too young. Anyway, we submitted them. Not all of us.
Sam Cooke fan. Grew up on it. Keep going.
Excellent. Good man. So we submitted an overall business justification to the payment SEG. That is, it covered everything that we wanted to do. It was reviewed and improved several times without gaining any approval, and we concluded that this was because there was just too much material in, and people who were reviewing it didn't feel confident. Effectively, they would never approve it because they would never feel confident that they hadn't missed something which was going to jump up and bite them later on. So we switched to plan B, of course, as we technical people always do. If you can't solve a difficult problem, turn it into an easy problem. So we decided to break these requests, the whole business justification, down into individual change requests and to submit those individually to the payments standards evaluation group. They agreed to take responsibility for ensuring that the full set of changes were agreed and implemented. Now, we said, obviously, if we do this, we've got to be sure that we're not going to get 60% of the changes approved and 40% rejected. We've got to get them all through somehow. And the registration management group and the payment SEG chairs have agreed to take responsibility for making sure that eventually that happens. So the original business justification, the one we originally proposed, has been paused. And a new business justification for a single message, PAX 008, which is the message which is used to execute a payment, has been approved and an evaluation team has been formed. So that's where we are now. Progress. Well, this isn't going to take long. So what's happened in this PI? The evaluation team has been meeting regularly, which is jolly good. We have been regularly re-emphasizing the reasons why IIPS systems need to be different from traditional ISO 20022 payments, because for some reason this just doesn't seem to be landing with people from European central banks and card companies, people like that. The evaluation, I'll rephrase that. The evaluation team has agreed that our requirement for agreement of terms, the quoting process, would be best met by a new pair of messages and not by, for instance, varying the state of the PAX 008 message. We've shelved the identifier issue because we think, at least in the first instance, we don't need to worry about it, and also because there is a separate business justification to which we've contributed, being produced by a group in Singapore who want to be able to manage funding. Want to be able to manage proxy identifications in a centralized directory. So for the moment, we think that's kind of okay. And we are keeping a watching and indeed supportive brief on the work that they are doing. And we have also produced a set of change requests for the PAX 008 message. And we have begun the process of reviewing them. Oh, joy. So the change requests we've brought forward are, first of all, to add the geolocation. As you know, we have maybe you don't know, but it's still true. We have a geolocation as part of our definition of a payment. And that's the thing that can be used, for instance, where someone is paying at a particular merchant or something like that. We can include the place, which is sometimes a good indicator of potential fraud. We have requested to extend the types of identification for natural entities to cover the Moja Loop identifier types, so things like health card, a marriage certificate. These are things which we recognize as forms of personal identity, but which ISO 20022 currently doesn't. And the same thing for juridical entities for businesses. We want to create a new external code set for the initiator type of a transfer. Maybe you don't know. We habitually use abbreviations like P2P and G2P and those sorts of things to specify what kind of transfer we're talking about. But in fact, the Moja Loop API has a much more highly structured version of that information, which means we vary different inputs to enable us to specify in reasonable detail what kind of transfer we're talking about. ISO 20022 have that, they just have a tag. So we want a new external code set for the initiator type, and we also want to add the transaction type information that we have. We also want to add merchant classification code, the information that can be recorded about a business, because we do that. This is more important. We need to add the amount received by the beneficiary to the information about a credit transfer. Now, as you know, we need, particularly in cases where there is currency conversion, we need to be able to say what sum the beneficiary will be credited in their account. All ISO 20022 cares about really is the amount that's going to be settled. So we needed to add that information. I am also going to say that I forgot to add, I think, yes, I did, the expiry time. Now, that's a powerful tool which we use to ensure that transfers reach a deterministic state in a relatively short period, or at least a defined period of time. So we're not in the situation that ISO 20022 currently is, where a request to pay is thrown over the fence and then you just sit there and get on with something else. And several days later you think, I wonder what happened to that request to pay that I sent. Don't know. So expiry means that we can guarantee that a transfer will reach a determined state in a determined amount of time. But I forgot to add that to this slide. My apologies. And finally, we need to add an ILP packet to the information about a credit transfer. In the request to execute a payment itself, that is essentially the transaction object that's sent through and which provides the recipient of the payment with the means for verifying that it is being asked to execute a payment it's already agreed to. So it's a surprising, not a terribly long list of things. Could have been much worse, I think. But anyway. So now I want to talk a bit about timetabling. Now, the ISO 20022 change timetable is like this. There are two separate timetables, one for changes to external code sets, which we would call enumerations, and one for changes to message content, or indeed new messages. External code set changes run on a quarterly timetable. So you just submit your changes. If they're approved, they go in the next quarterly release for the external code sets, which is a large Excel spreadsheet. Changes to message content, on the other hand, run on an annual cycle. Changes are accepted for assessment at the beginning of June. They are approved for implementation at the end of November. They are implemented following spring. Now, timing is changes to external code sets can be raised and approved at any time. They can be implemented. We've talked about this. My apologies. Not sure where. Oh, yes, sorry. One thing that I want to say is, why is this period so long? And the answer is that changes are made in the underlying data model, not in the message itself. So implementers have to look at the impact of potential changes on other messages which might use the same model. They have to decide whether to fork the model or update the other messages at the same time. And that may add quite considerably to the complexity of the implementation. So it's not entirely foolish that they do things like this. And the consequence is the change requests that we are now reviewing, the ones that I've just talked to you about, they'll be approved at the beginning of June next year, accepted, which of course they will be, in November next year, and actually implemented in spring 2025, i.e. almost 2 years from now. That's not so good. So what can we do about this? We can work on getting agreement for the changes we want, and then we can proceed as if the changes had been implemented once they're agreed in the evaluation team. And we have the support of the Payments Seg chair for this approach. So he is happy that that's a low-risk approach. I mean, we've told him that we just can't afford to wait 2 years for these implementations, and that if we're going to be able to make useful contributions, then we've got to be able to do things a lot more quickly. Right, so now a brief excursus on the ISO20022 usage survey. This comes from the last community meeting in Kigali, where people said it would be useful to get a clear understanding of who's using ISO20022 messages for payment system, how they're using them. Are they using them unmodified? Are they using supplementary data, or are they cannibalizing them? This would be useful for, first of all, mapping the spread of ISO20022 messaging, understand who's using it and what they're using it for, understanding practical solutions to the problems posed by existing message structures, and of course keeping the ISO20022 organization updated with the sometimes unconventional ways in which people are using those messages. So far, we've reached out to African Ender, who are not currently maintaining any information of this kind, but will be happy to participate in the gathering and maintenance of this information. A draft survey has been developed, and you will see that there's a link to it if you want to go and look at it in the slide. It's been reviewed by interested parties, thank you, Sam, who have suggested changes which have been incorporated, and it's ready for issue to the first institutions that African Ender have been suggesting. So that's that side of things. You'd be most welcome to, as I say, to go and have a look and review and suggest improvements. Now, I want to finish off by talking. Have I got any time, Simeon? Don't know. Simeon?
You have about 25 minutes.
25 minutes left? That can't be right.
It is right.
Wow.
Yeah.
That means I only spent 5 minutes, doesn't it? I mean, I know it's been a pretty dull presentation, but it certainly seems to me it's lasted longer than 5 minutes.
Go ahead, Michael. I'll give you a heads up if time runs out.
Okay, thanks very much. So, the question is how we represent a currency conversion, which you'll be finding out later this afternoon. We want to do as a separate set of messages. The ISO 20022 message set doesn't currently support retail currency conversion messages, but it does have a purpose code, which is like a payment type code for a foreign currency transaction that's processed between two domestic financial institutions. He said, running out of breath on an ISO 20022 definition. And as you've heard, we just added a payee receive amount to the ISO credit transfer transaction. There are a number of identifiers in the block which enables the identification of a payment, and one of those could be used by convention to represent a dependency relationship, i.e. to say this currency conversion is dependent on this transfer. So in principle, the currency conversion could either be included in the same message as the transfer, because the structure of ISO 20022 messages allows for multiple credit transfers to be included in the same payment execution message, or processed as a separate message. So my conclusion is, it looks as if we could represent currency conversions in the way we're about to propose, using the existing ISO 20022 messages. We need to do some more detailed analysis on that. So my advice is watch this space. And that, I'm afraid, is all I have for you. So I think that's the only time in living memory that I've done a 6-minute presentation. But anyway. Does anyone have any questions? Sorry, I'm just... Oh, King of Soul, RIP. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Though Aretha Franklin's version, I think, will never be bettered. Wow, there's a lot of stuff here, which is great. Goodness me. So I'm not sure that I'm going to be in position to answer those immediately. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just reading Karim's comment. Yeah, now the problem that we're going to have, so this is addressed to Karim and Fahadi. Let me just read Karim's comment for those of you who haven't. In Pakistan, we implemented ISO 20022 in IIPS. However, we used a set of REST APIs to overcome the shortcomings. So, for instance, we use APIs to discover the destination DFSP account in IBAN format, and we use that in the standard ISO 20022 message. Now, the direction we're headed in, Karim,
Michael,
is...
hold on. Karim has his hand up, so maybe he wants to...
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yes.
Karim, go ahead.
Yeah.
Head on, Karim.
Michael. Yeah, I understand that you're taking a systemic approach to formally get the changes done in the ISO 20022 message. Some of the changes, once you share the presentation, it would be interesting because things like geolocation and merchant category classification, we have actually implemented that in the current PEG 008 message. So would be interesting to see what are the changes proposed, and the ones which we did, are they aligned with the standards?
Can I send you my questionnaire as well and you can fill it in?
Sure.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, the point I was going to make is that as you will see, or as you will have seen, we are also members of the ISO 20022 API group. And the purpose of that group is to, I think, as I said earlier, when a message is generated, an ISO 20022 message, for instance, as a schema definition in XML, it's generated by applying a transformation to a data dictionary object. And they are currently working, for instance, on a transformation which will produce JSON objects as a consequence of, from underlying data dictionary definitions. So you'll be able basically essentially to press button A to get an XML schema, button B to get a JSON schema. Now, there's also a group which is looking at using that to produce an open API definition. And my worry, therefore, is that will lead to, that will effectively cross over some of the work that you've been doing with APIs, because we will be automating the production of APIs from the data dictionary.
Yeah, thanks. Got it.
Okay. I mean, we are. You'll probably be surprised. Actually, no, you probably won't be surprised to hear that we are really playing a straight bat on this one. We've really tried to join and contribute to the ISO organization in all of the ways that we can, and to insist that they treat the requirements of systems in payment systems in the emerging markets and developing economies sphere as of equal value to the large-scale payments that they're used to dealing with in first world economies. We think that's important. I mean, not just because it means that we will be properly aligned with the ISO20022 organization, but also because it means, I hope, that they will need to take more account of, people who aren't the JP Morgans and the Citibanks and the MasterCards of this world, but to recognize that a very large number of people in the world are served by small informal account holding organizations which are collected together into IIPSs according to the level 1 principles. So it's important from that point of view as well, we think.
Greg, you have a question?
I'll just real quick, since we're a little slow on questions right now, I thought I'd ask a direct of you. Have you seen anything that has a good overview explanation of all of the rules in ISO without having to actually read the XML files and things like that? This field means this field is reused here, this field is reused here, etc. Because if I use the Eclipse tool and some of the other things that are located on the site, it takes me to really high-level stuff. It takes me to things I used to use when I did BPEL type development and stuff like that with WAS and things. It doesn't give me that kind of overview.
Okay, no, it doesn't. So part of the answer to that is if you're talking about the actual rules, and part of the problem that ISO has is that, as you know, XML schemas are not very useful for rules. Right. Those are published for each message as part of the message description report. Right. Okay. Now you can download an MDR for each message, and that will say, for instance, if you use if you define the recipient at the header level, you're not allowed to define the recipient at the individual transfer level. Simple rule and obvious. But again, there's nothing in the schema, or no way in an XML schema of expressing that. So those rules are there. As far as the rules, as far as the rest of the rules, I guess I'm going to say probably the MDRs are the place that the ISO organization expects people to go to find out. Now, the MDRs are supposed to contain definitions of what the messages are intended to be used for and the sequence in which they're intended to be used. The problem is that, in my experience, that side of them is often not terribly well defined.
No, it doesn't appear to be. What I want to build is kind of a palette that says, these are standard XML structures, and yes, starting with payments, but I actually want to get into other things. And we pull that down or drag or drop the items into the rule builder for our given rules on the fraud side of things. So, yeah.
Now, what I can do is one of the guys who was working with us earlier, a guy called Jason Pollis, who is a far more experienced with ISO than am I, and not that that's very hard. He was putting together a modeling tool for ISO messages. And I think that's in a state where people can download it and can load existing messages into it.
Interesting.
So that should enable you to say, to show in a kind of standard UML type modeling way how the components that go to build up a whole message are organized. I will get in touch with him. I'll take that as an action from this meeting and find out what state that's in and if it's available where you can go to download it.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that.
No worries. Right. Yes.
do you want to conclude, or?
Nope, I've concluded. That's it. Sorry, I don't have an any questions slide, which is a bit of an oversight. I can concede, but
that's all right, Michael. Thank you.
So just to say, if anyone has any further questions, then do post them in the chat, and I will try and catch them and respond to them.
Excellent.